The officer called her weak, but that was before he saw the truth etched into her skin. He saw a woman assigned to his command with a thin file and a quiet demeanor, and he judged. He believed strength was loud. He thought competence announced itself with swagger. He would soon learn, in the frozen silence of a crisis, that the most dangerous people are the ones you never see coming. He would learn that some scars are not signs of weakness, but terrifying maps of survival. Elara Vance arrived at Forward Operating Base Nightingale on a Tuesday, carried in on the same biting wind that scoured the surrounding peaks. The air was thin here, tasting of iron and ice. The base was a collection of hardened structures dug into the gray rock of the borderlands, a lonely sentinel in a forgotten conflict. Soldiers, bundled in thermal gear, moved with the brisk, joyless efficiency of people who had long ago made peace with the cold. They glanced at her, a single passenger stepping off the transport chopper, her face impassive, her duffel bag slung over a shoulder that seemed too slight to carry any real weight. They saw her papers, identifying her as a strategic analyst, and their curiosity evaporated. An analyst, another body for a windowless room, another pair of eyes for a screen, far from the real work. Her assigned quarters were a small, sterile cube, identical to all the others. A bunk, a locker, a desk. She unpacked with methodical precision, each item placed with purpose. There was no clutter in her life, no sentimentality in her possessions. Everything she owned served a function. As she worked, she listened. She heard the hum of the base's life support, the distant crackle of comms chatter, the rhythmic crunch of boots on frozen gravel outside. She could already feel the base's rhythm, its pulse. Later, in the operations center, she was given a terminal and a security clearance that was surprisingly low-level. It gave her access to public satellite feeds and unclassified network traffic. It was a clear message. You are here, but you are not one of us. While others saw busy screens, Elara saw a language. She watched the patrol routes logged on the tactical display. She saw the sweep of the perimeter sensors. After an hour of silent observation, she noticed it. A tiny, cyclical blind spot in the southeastern sensor grid. It was a ghost in the machine, a flicker that lasted less than 2 seconds every 17 minutes, precisely when the network rerouted data packets for a diagnostic check. It was a flaw in the code, a microscopic vulnerability. A professional would have designed it that way intentionally, a backdoor hidden in plain sight. An enemy could drive a truck through that gap, given the right timing. She said nothing. She just filed the information away, a single piece of a puzzle she was only beginning to assemble. She was a ghost in this new machine, and her first task was to learn its secrets, its weaknesses. The dismissal from the others was a cloak. It allowed her to see without being seen, to listen without being heard. In their underestimation, they had given her the greatest weapon of all, invisibility. Colonel Madsen did not grant her the courtesy of a meeting in his office. He summoned her to the command center's central dais, a glass-walled enclosure from which he oversaw his kingdom of data and discipline. He remained seated as she approached, a clear power play. Madsen was a man carved from the same unforgiving rock as the mountains around them. His uniform was immaculate, his jaw set, his eyes the color of a winter sky. He held a tablet with her personnel file on the screen, his thumb swiping through the sparse, heavily redacted pages with casual disdain. "Vance?" he began, his voice flat, devoid of welcome. "Your file is thin." He looked up, his gaze sweeping over her, cataloging her slim build, her calm posture, her unassuming presence. He saw none of the hardened edges he expected from personnel assigned to a forward operating base. "It says here you have a background in signals analysis from a desk at headquarters. This is not headquarters. The air is thin and the threats are real. This is a place for soldiers." Elara stood perfectly still, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. Her expression was neutral. "I understand, sir. Do you?" Madsen leaned forward, his tone sharpening, laced with condescension. "We have a high-tempo operational environment here. Every member of this command has a critical role. They have been tested, vetted, and proven in the field. I run a tight ship, and I have no room for passengers. I have no idea why command saddled me with a paper pusher, but you're here now." He gestured vaguely at the bustling activity of the operations center around them. "My people are the best. They are strong, resilient. This environment can break people who aren't prepared for it." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He thought she was weak. A political appointment, a favor called in, a body to fill a quota. She didn't rise to the bait. Her discipline was a fortress, her composure absolute. "I will do my best not to get in the way, Colonel." The answer seemed to irritate him more than any protest would have. It was too passive, too accepting of his judgment. Confirmed his assessment. He saw meekness. "See that you don't," he said, his voice dropping to a dismissive growl. "You're assigned to data collation. Monitor the open source feeds. Report anything unusual to Sergeant Rivas." He pointed to a non-commissioned officer who was already pointedly ignoring them. "That will be all. Dismissed." Elara gave a crisp, regulation nod and turned, walking away from the dais without a backward glance. She could feel his eyes on her, and the eyes of half the command staff. She heard the whispers start before she had even cleared the central platform. She was an anomaly, a question mark. To Madsen, she was a liability. To the others, she was an object of momentary curiosity, soon to be forgotten in the daily grind. They had all looked at her, but none of them had seen her. They saw a quiet woman in a clean uniform. They didn't see the coiled stillness in her posture, the hyper-awareness in her eyes, or the chilling calm that resided deep within her. He had called her weak. He had drawn his line in the sand. And Elara Vance, who had survived places that would have turned Colonel Madsen's soul to dust, simply went to her assigned terminal and began to work. Her war would not be fought with words. In the days that followed, Elara became part of the background hum of the base. She existed in the spaces between the important work, a silent observer at the edge of the room. She performed her assigned task, monitoring open-source chatter and unclassified satellite imagery, with a quiet diligence that made her functionally invisible. But while her hands were busy with mundane data, her mind was mapping the ecosystem of FOB Nightingale. She was a predator learning a new hunting ground. She studied people. She learned that Lieutenant Kova, the lead comms technician, chewed on his thumbnail when network latency spiked above 3%, a sign of frayed nerves under pressure. She observed that the drone pilots in the West Bay, a trio of cocky young sergeants, relied too heavily on the system's autopilot for their return-to-base protocols, a lazy habit that created predictable flight paths. She watched Colonel Madsen and saw a man who equated control with shouting, a leader who managed personnel but did not inspire them. He demanded obedience, not excellence. Her focus often drifted to Corporal Kenji Tanaka, a young signals intelligence specialist who worked the night shift. Unlike his peers, who were often distracted by games or idle chatter on the internal network, Tanaka was always working. He ran his own diagnostic scripts, cross-referenced ghost signals others dismissed as atmospheric interference, and kept meticulous, color-coded logs that went far beyond protocol. He was sharp, intuitive, and completely overlooked by the command structure. He was an asset being wasted. Elara saw in him a spark of the same meticulous discipline she held within herself. She studied the environment. She didn't just look at the satellite feeds. She absorbed them. She learned the shadows of the mountain range, how they shifted with the seasons, not just the time of day. She memorized the wadis and canyons that were invisible to standard topographical software but revealed themselves in infrared overlays during the coldest hours before dawn. These were the secret paths, the unmonitored arteries of the land. She cross-referenced weather patterns with enemy patrol schedules gleaned from faint radio intercepts, building predictive models in her head. She saw the region not as a map, but as a living, breathing entity with its own rhythms and secrets. Her own routine was a study in ascetic discipline. She was the first in the operations center and the last to leave. She ate her meals alone in the mess hall, her focus entirely on the food, consuming it for fuel, not pleasure. She ran before sunrise, circling the base perimeter in the freezing dark, her breath pluming behind her. Her pace never varied, her stride economical and powerful. The guards in the towers, initially curious, grew accustomed to the solitary figure pounding out miles in the pre-dawn gloom. They thought it was a strange habit for a desk analyst. They didn't recognize it for what it was, the maintenance of a weapon. One afternoon, during a routine system diagnostic, the base's internal power grid flickered. For 3 seconds, the lights dimmed and the screens went blank before the backup generators kicked in. In that brief moment of chaos, a low murmur of anxiety filled the command center. People swore, rebooted their terminals, and complained. Alara didn't move. Her eyes, already adjusted to the low light, had scanned the entire room, cataloging every reaction. She saw who panicked, who froze, and who, like Corporal Tanaka, immediately began checking their system's integrity without waiting for orders. She saw the base's fragility, not in its technology, but in its people. They were complacent, comfortable behind their walls of steel and code. They believed they were safe. Alara knew that safety was the most dangerous illusion of all. She had learned everything she needed to know. Now she just had to wait. The pressure arrived not as a frontal assault, but as a virus in the bloodstream. It began subtly. A drone feed stuttered, showing a ghostly, repeating image of an empty valley for 3 seconds before correcting itself. Then a perimeter sensor on the north face tripped, reporting a heat signature that vanished before a camera could slew to its position. Sergeant Rivas logged it as a sensor malfunction, likely caused by the extreme cold. An hour later, the base's internal comms system filled with static for 10 seconds, a harsh, screeching sound that set everyone's teeth on edge. Colonel Madsen, annoyed by the interruptions, barked at his technicians. "Get this sorted out, Kova. This is a command center, not a pirate radio station." Lieutenant Kova, his thumb already in his mouth, frantically ran diagnostics. "I don't know, sir. The system is reporting full integrity. It's like electronic ghosts." Then the ghosts became corporeal. Suddenly, every screen in the command center flickered. The tactical map dissolved into a cascade of nonsensical symbols. The drone feeds all switched to the same looping video of a cloudy sky. Red alerts began flashing on the perimeter grid, dozens of them at once, reporting a massed infantry assault from all directions. The command center, once a place of controlled order, erupted into chaos. Phones were ringing with dead air. Keyboards clattered uselessly against locked-out systems. Young soldiers, their faces pale, shouted conflicting information. "Multiple contacts. Sector Gamma. I've lost the southern drone. The feed is gone. The firewall is not responding. We're locked out." Madsen stood on his dais, his face a thunderous mask of fury and confusion. "Get me external comms. I want air support on standby. Seal the blast doors. Someone tell me what the hell is happening." His orders were loud, but they were the thrashings of a man drowning. He was trying to fight a battle based on phantom information, reacting to ghosts designed to make him panic. Through it all, Alara Vance remained still. She had risen from her seat at the edge of the room, her eyes sweeping over the chaos not with alarm, but with cold, analytical focus. She ignored the flashing red lights and the shouting voices. Instead, she watched the data streams on a small, secondary engineering monitor that no one else was paying attention to. She watched the raw packet data, the lifeblood of the network. It was gibberish to most, but to her it was a confession. The malicious code wasn't a battering ram at the gate. It was a parasite that had been inside for days, waiting. It wasn't attacking the firewall. It was using the base's own diagnostic and update protocols against it. The false alerts, the ghosting feeds, they were all a distraction, noise to cover the real attack. She saw the pattern. The attack wasn't random. It was rhythmic, pulsing through the system along the same pathways as the drone firmware updates. It was elegant, sophisticated, and it was moments away from achieving its objective. Not to destroy the base, but to steal its most sensitive data, the encryption keys for the entire sector. The chaos was just a smokescreen. The real damage was about to be done in complete silence. And nobody, least of all the bellowing Colonel Madsen, had any idea. Alara moved. Her motion was fluid and purposeful, a shark cutting through turbulent water. She didn't run or shout. She walked directly to a maintenance terminal tucked away in an alcove, one that had direct, hardline access to the network's physical servers. The technicians were all at the main consoles, fighting the Phantom Army on their screens. No one noticed her. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, not with the frantic pecking of the others, but with the precise, economical movements of a surgeon. She wasn't trying to fight the virus head-on. That's what it wanted. She was cutting it off from its source of power. She ignored the corrupted main interface, instead opening a root command prompt. A black screen with a simple green cursor appeared. It was the machine's most basic language, a place with no graphics to corrupt, no interfaces to hijack. Disconnect, override netdrone_update_server. Isolate, physical server bank_C. Reroute, force comprimary channel backup_7. Her commands were simple, brutal, and executed with an authority the system could not deny. She wasn't asking. She was telling. The first command severed the connection to the drone update server, the hidden pathway the virus was using. The second physically firewalled the server bank where the encryption keys were stored, creating a digital dead end. The third command bypassed the static-filled primary comms and activated a deeply buried, rarely used emergency channel that was hardwired and shielded from the main network. Across the room, the effect was instantaneous and dramatic. The flashing red alerts on the main tactical map vanished. The ghosting drone feeds went black. The screeching static in their headsets was replaced by a clean, quiet hum. The chaos didn't fade away. It snapped off, as if a switch had been flipped. The command center was plunged into a sudden, unnerving silence, broken only by the heavy breathing of its stunned occupants. Every head turned, following the source of the impossible calm. They saw Alara Vance, standing at the forgotten maintenance terminal, her hands still resting on the keyboard. She hadn't broken a sweat. Her face was as impassive as it had been when she'd arrived. She looked up and her eyes met Colonel Madsen's across the silent room. She didn't offer an explanation. She didn't boast or smile. She had simply intervened, solved an unsolvable problem in under a minute, and now stood waiting. The woman he had dismissed as a weak paper pusher had just saved his command from a catastrophic failure. The silence stretched, thick with questions and a dawning, uncomfortable sense of awe. The quiet in the command center was heavier than the previous chaos had been. It was a silence filled with recalibration, as every person in the room reevaluated their assumptions about the unassuming analyst. Lieutenant Kova was the first to break it, his voice shaky as he stared at his diagnostic screen. "Sir, all systems are green. The malicious code is gone. It's been purged." I don't know how. He looked over at Alara, his expression a mixture of confusion and profound respect. Colonel Madsen descended from his dais, his boots making heavy, deliberate sounds on the metal floor. He stopped a few feet from Alara, his face unreadable, a mask of rigid control. The condescension was gone, replaced by a wary, intense scrutiny. He was looking at her properly for the first time, not as a personnel file or a nuisance, but as a factor he could not explain. "Report," he commanded. His voice was low, stripped of its earlier bluster. "It was a parasitic code," Alara stated, her tone even and direct. It piggybacked on the drone firmware update protocol. It was designed to create chaos on the primary network while it extracted the sector encryption keys from server bank C. The external attack was a feint. She delivered the information without technical jargon. A clean, concise summary. Madsen's eyes narrowed. He was a commander, not a technician, but he understood strategy. He understood the concept of a feint. "And you knew this how?" "I saw the pattern," she replied simply. The initial glitches weren't random. They followed the exact timing of the network's diagnostic data packet rerouting. The same rerouting that was exploited by the code. It was hiding in the system's own rhythm. The simplicity of her answer was more stunning than a complex explanation would have been. She hadn't used some secret software. She had used observation. She had paid attention when no one else was. The whispers started again among the technicians and soldiers, but this time they were different. They were not dismissive. They were awed. Who was she? Where did she come from? Corporal Tanaka, from his console across the room, watched her with wide eyes. He had seen her working late, had seen the intensity of her focus, but this was something else entirely. This was a level of competence he had never witnessed. Madsen stared at her for a long moment, his mind working furiously. This was no ordinary analyst. The calm she displayed under extreme pressure, the surgical precision of her response, the depth of her immediate understanding of a novel threat. These were not the skills of a desk jockey. These were the skills of a seasoned operator. But her file said nothing. It was a blank. "You have a background in this, Vance?" he pressed, searching for a piece of the puzzle. "I have some experience with network security, sir," she said, the answer a masterful understatement. He knew she was withholding information. He could feel the wall of classification behind her simple words. But he also knew he had no authority to push further. For now, he had been wrong about her, dangerously wrong. His dismissal had nearly cost him his command. The realization settled in his gut like a cold stone. He had underestimated her, and in doing so, he had exposed his entire flank. He was a man who prided himself on his judgment of soldiers, and his judgment had been profoundly, utterly flawed. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. It was not an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. "Carry on," he said, the words feeling inadequate. He turned and walked back to his dais, his posture rigid. The crisis was over, but a new, more personal one had just begun for him. The mystery of Alara Vance was now the most pressing tactical problem at FOB Nightingale, and he had no idea how to solve it. The second test came less than a week later, delivered by the unforgiving landscape itself. A two-man long-range reconnaissance patrol, call sign Pathfinder, was operating deep in the serrated peaks of the Akram Range, a notorious haven for insurgent forces. Their mission was to place seismic sensors along a suspected smuggling route. They were skilled, experienced soldiers, and they had just gone silent. Their last transmission was a single, garbled word: contact, then nothing. A massive blizzard, a wall of white that had been forecast for the next day, had surged ahead of schedule and was now descending upon the range, threatening to bury the entire region in meters of snow. The command center was a hive of controlled tension. Standard rescue protocol involved a helicopter insertion with a quick reaction force. But the storm was making flight impossible. The wind shear alone could rip a chopper from the sky. A ground vehicle approach would take 12 hours, far too long, and the noise would announce their presence to every insurgent for 20 kilometers. They were blind, deaf, and running out of time. Every passing minute decreased Pathfinder's chances of survival, whether from enemy action or the lethal cold. Colonel Madsen stood before the main tactical map, a satellite image of the Akram Range. The patrol's last known position was a blinking red dot in a sea of hostile terrain. His section leaders offered grim assessments. "Sir, visibility is near zero. Thermal imaging is useless in these conditions. Any ground team we send will be moving blind and slow. The enemy will have the advantage. If they're injured, they won't last 2 hours in this storm." Madsen's face was granite. He was facing the loss of 2 of his men, a failure that would stain his command. He had exhausted all the standard options. The playbook was useless. His eyes scanned the faces of his team, seeing the same grim resignation on each one. Then his gaze fell upon Alara. She was standing at the edge of the room as usual, watching the map. But she wasn't looking at the blinking red dot. Her eyes were tracing the faint, almost invisible lines of the canyons and ridges, the places the topographical software ignored. He remembered her words. I saw the pattern. He was out of options. His way had failed. He made a decision, a gamble born of desperation. "Vance," he called out, his voice cutting through the tense murmurs. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. "You see patterns. What do you see now?" Alara walked forward, stepping into the light of the holographic map. She didn't hesitate. She pointed to a deep, narrow canyon that snaked its way toward the patrol's last known position. "This route is unmonitored," she said. "The canyon walls are sheer granite. They block satellite thermal imaging and scatterground radar. According to the Geological Survey, the floor is river-worn stone. A light vehicle could make it." A major on his staff immediately objected. "That's a death trap. Perfect ambush alley. The insurgents know these mountains better than we do." "They know the main routes," Alara countered, her voice calm and steady. "They expect us to come from the air or the main valley pass. They won't be watching a route they believe is impassable, especially not in this storm. The blizzard is our cover. Its noise will mask a vehicle's sound, and the snow will cover our tracks." She then pointed to a ridge overlooking the patrol's location. The enemy contact was likely here. A small observation post. Pathfinder stumbled upon them. "They're not being held at the post. That's too exposed. They would have been taken south into this cave system." She indicated a series of dark patches on the map that no one else had even registered as significant. "It's the most defensible position in the sector." Her analysis was swift, confident, and terrifyingly plausible. She had laid out the entire situation as if she had been there herself. Madsen stared at the map, then at her. He saw a path where moments before there had been none. It was a razor's edge, a mission that was borderline suicidal, but it was the only chance they had. "A plan like that requires a small team," Madsen said, testing her. "Fast and quiet. Who would be qualified to lead such a mission?" The question hung in the air. He expected her to recommend one of the decorated Special Forces liaisons. Instead, her answer was a direct challenge to his entire command structure. "I will," she said simply. There was no arrogance in her voice, only fact. "Give me Corporal Tanaka. He's the fastest signals tech you have. He can bypass their comms if we run into trouble. And he's the only one here who can keep up." The room was stunned into silence. An analyst and a junior corporal? On a mission that would make a seasoned commando hesitate? Madsen looked at Tanaka, who stood straighter, his face a mask of shock and a dawning, fierce pride. Then he looked back at Alara. He saw no doubt in her eyes, no fear, only absolute, unshakable certainty. Against every regulation in the book, against his own ingrained instincts, he found himself believing her. "The armory is yours," Madsen said, his voice quiet but firm. "Get it done, Vance." The preparation was a blur of focused activity. In the base armory, Alara moved with an eerie familiarity, selecting weapons and equipment with practiced efficiency. She chose a compact, suppressed carbine for herself and another for Tanaka, along with sidearms, thermal cloaks, and specialized climbing gear. Tanaka, working beside her, was a whirlwind of nervous energy and adrenaline. He had never been on a field operation of this magnitude, but his trust in Alara was absolute. He had seen what she could do with a keyboard. He was about to learn what she could do with a rifle. As they prepared, Alara stripped off her standard-issue uniform jacket to pull on a skin-tight thermal base layer. Tanaka turned to hand her a spare battery pack and stopped dead. His breath hitched in his throat. The lights of the armory were harsh and unforgiving, and they revealed what her uniform had always concealed. Her back and arms were a tapestry of violence. A thick, puckered burn scar stretched from her left shoulder blade down to her waist. The skin melted and reformed into a grotesque pattern. A series of perfectly straight, parallel scars crisscrossed her right forearm, the kind of marks left by a blade, not an accident. Her shoulders were dotted with the small, jagged craters of old shrapnel wounds. This was not the random damage of a single firefight. This was a roadmap of a dozen different hells, a history of survival written in ruined flesh. The scars were old, silvery white, but they spoke of a past so brutal it was almost incomprehensible. He had seen wounded soldiers before, but this was different. This was systematic destruction. He finally understood the source of her unshakable calm. After surviving whatever had done this to her, a network crash or a blizzard was nothing. He quickly looked away, a profound and silent respect dawning on him. He said nothing, just handed her the battery, his hand trembling slightly. Meanwhile, back in the command center, Colonel Madsen was watching their 2 life sign indicators begin to move across the tactical map. He had staked his career and the lives of 4 men on the word of a mysterious analyst. The weight of it was crushing. He turned to his aide, a young, ambitious lieutenant. "I want to know who she is," he ordered, his voice a low growl. "Use my override codes. Break whatever firewalls you have to. I want to see her real file. Now." The lieutenant, recognizing the gravity of the command, rushed to a secure terminal. For the next hour, as Alara and Tanaka's icons crept through the digital canyon, he fought against layers of digital security that were unlike anything he had ever encountered. Finally, with a last, desperate keystroke, a single file unlocked. It was heavily encrypted, and most of it remained redacted, blacked out by an authority far above base command. But a few fragments were visible. He brought the tablet to Madsen. "Sir, this is all I could get." Madsen took the tablet. The screen showed a single project heading, Project Ghostwalker. Below it, a line of text, Operative, Vance, Alara, call sign, Nix, and then a string of mission codenames, all blacked out except for one, Operation Winter Shroud. Attached was a partial after-action report. It spoke of a solo operative who successfully infiltrated and sabotaged an enemy nation's primary command and control bunker, single-handedly preventing a border war. The report mentioned the operative was caught in the resulting explosion during exfiltration. It listed her as presumed killed in action, later amended to recovered, status classified. The report concluded with a list of sustained injuries: severe plasma burns, multiple lacerations, shrapnel wounds. Madsen read the words, and his blood ran cold. He froze. Ghostwalker wasn't a project. It was a myth, a legend whispered about in classified intelligence briefings. They were the ghosts the military sent when they couldn't send soldiers, operatives who officially didn't exist. Nix was a name spoken with the same reverence and fear as the boogeyman. They said Nix had toppled governments with a laptop and a knife. They said she had survived things that would have killed a battalion. He looked from the chilling words on the tablet to the tactical screen, where the 2 small, green dots representing Vance and Tanaka were now closing in on the enemy position. The weak analyst, the paper pusher. He had put a living legend, a ghost of a forgotten war, on a rescue mission. He finally understood. He hadn't sent a soldier into the storm. He had unleashed a force of nature. The respect came not with a parade or a medal, but in the silence after the storm. Alara and Tanaka returned just as the first rays of dawn broke through the dissipating blizzard. They brought Pathfinder back. The 2 rescued soldiers were frostbitten and exhausted, one with a makeshift splint on his leg, but they were alive. They walked on their own, flanking Alara. Their expressions a mixture of gratitude and pure, unadulterated awe. They had seen what she could do in the dark, in the snow, against impossible odds. They had witnessed her dismantle an enemy outpost with a chilling efficiency that was both terrifying and beautiful. As the small, weary group walked across the tarmac toward the medical bay, the base slowly came to a standstill. The morning shift, heading for the mess hall, stopped. The mechanics working on the ground vehicles put down their tools. The guards in the towers watched from above. No one cheered or shouted. The story had already spread through the base's internal network. A viral legend passed and hushed. Encrypted messages from the command center staff. They knew. They knew she had gone out into a killer storm when no one else could. They knew she had faced down an enemy force with only a junior corporal for backup. They knew she had brought their brothers home. It was a quiet, spreading wave of recognition. They just watched, their silence a more profound tribute than any applause could ever be. Colonel Madsen was waiting for them outside the command center. He had watched the entire operation on a single, encrypted drone feed that Alara herself had activated, a feed that bypassed the main system. He had seen her move through the enemy camp like a wraith. He had seen her neutralize 3 guards with a series of movements so fast and precise they barely registered. He had seen her intelligence, her strategy, and her lethality in equal, terrifying measure. Alara saw him and slowed, her team stopping with her. She expected a debrief, a reprimand for her methods, another confrontation. Instead, Madsen stood his ground. His face cleared of all its previous arrogance and skepticism. He looked at her, at the frost clinging to her hair, at the exhaustion she held tightly under a mask of control, and at the two living soldiers standing beside her. He saw the truth of her, beyond the redacted files and the legendary call sign. He saw a soldier. He said nothing. He simply drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and rendered a slow, perfect salute. It was not the perfunctory gesture of a superior officer. It was the salute of a soldier to another soldier, an acknowledgement of skill, courage, and sacrifice that transcended rank. It was a public and unequivocal admission that he had been wrong, the highest and most difficult honor a man like him could bestow. All across the tarmac, other soldiers saw their commander's gesture, and one by one they, too, raised their hands in salute. The mechanics, the pilots, the cooks, the guards. A silent, rippling wave of respect for the quiet analyst who had become their protector. Alara met Madsen's gaze. She held it for a long moment. Then, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. The gesture was small, but it closed the distance between them. The war for respect was over. She turned and continued toward the medical bay, the two rescued soldiers falling into step beside her. She had not asked for their respect, but she had earned it. Weeks passed. The snows on the peaks began to recede, and a fragile spring crept into the high desert. FOB Nightingale had changed. The base ran with a new efficiency, a quiet confidence that hadn't existed before. The change wasn't in the protocols or the hardware. It was in the atmosphere. The command center was calmer, the chatter more focused. Colonel Madsen's orders were less frequent but more precise. He had learned to listen. Alara Vance was still assigned to her small, windowless office, her official title still strategic analyst, but her role had fundamentally shifted. She was no longer an outsider. Lieutenants now quietly sought her out to review tactical plans before submitting them. The drone pilots came to her with questions about enemy patrol patterns, which she answered without ever looking away from her screen. Sergeant Rivas now brought her the morning intelligence briefings personally. They didn't call her Nix, they didn't speak of Project Ghostwalker. They simply called her Ma'am or Vance. But the words were now weighted with a deep, unspoken reverence. Her relationship with Corporal Tanaka had settled into a comfortable, silent partnership. He never spoke of what he had seen in the armory or in the snowy canyon. He didn't need to. He understood. He made sure her terminal always had the latest software patches and that a fresh, hot cup of coffee was sitting on her desk every morning before she arrived. A small, daily ritual of gratitude. The story closes on a quiet afternoon. Alara sits at her desk, bathed in the cool glow of her multiple monitors. On the main screen is a high-resolution satellite image of a remote, mountainous region hundreds of kilometers away, a place of jagged peaks and deep, shadowed valleys. Her finger, the one on the hand not covered in the thin, silvery lines of old scars, traces a potential infiltration route along a riverbed that is invisible on standard maps. She is hunting again, seeing the patterns that no one else can, a silent guardian watching over the borders of a world that would never know her name. The coffee cup Tanaka left for her steams gently beside her keyboard. She is alone, but she is not lonely. She is a ghost in the machine, a warrior in a quiet room, her brutal past acknowledged and her invaluable present finally, completely understood. Her scarred hand rests on the mouse, a weapon of a new kind of war, perfectly still, perfectly calm and ready. The dignity she had earned remained, a quiet, unshakable presence in the heart of the storm.